Hello, this is Alan W. Wright from the Robin Hood website boldoutlaw.com, and I'm here to do my second video about the works of Howard Pyle, who wrote The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood, of great renown in Nottinghamshire, in 1883. And this has remained, over 100 years later, still probably the most classic, much reprinted, pretty much always in print in different editions, Robin Hood children's novel. And so I'm going to read today his prologue, or the first half of his prologue, the encounter Robin Hood has with foresters and how Robin Hood became an outlaw. So before I begin, I should say that Pyle's language is old-fashioned. It's not just old-fashioned because he was writing in 1883. He was writing it to sound old-fashioned in 1883. So, for example, he might say, quoth he, instead of he said. So I'm going to define a few words and terms he uses. I guess first, there's references to Our Lady, by Our Lady. Now, many of you will know this. If you don't, that's a reference to the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Robin Hood is especially devoted to the Virgin Mary in a lot of the early ballads. And so when you hear by Our Lady and such, that's who they're referring to. I guess another important word that comes up a lot is score. And that's just a really old way of saying 20. And if you combine it with another number, you multiply it by that number. For example, Robin Hood's band in both one of the early ballads and in this section I'm going to read to you is described at one point as having 70 men. That's 7 times 20, or 140 members of Robin Hood's band. He also shoots at a target that is 70 rods away, and that's 60 rods away. What's a rod? It's a unit of measurement. It's changed over time. I think rods today are a little shorter than they used to be, but nowadays the common usage of rod is 16.5 feet. He's shooting at something that's 60 rods away, so 60 times 16 is 990 feet. So it's a very impressive feat of archery that he does with cloth yard arrows or cloth yard shafts. What's a cloth yard? It's a unit of measurement. Again, it's changed over time. It can range between like 28 and 36 inches. It's a very long arrow at any rate. You need to have very long arms, be somewhat tall, and very strong to be able to pull a bow back that far to hold an arrow like that and to be able to shoot a target with any force. And Robin Hood's mocked in this story because he's very young, and so there's a question, is he actually strong enough to pull an arrow far back that long and to shoot it that far, because that does require a lot of strength. And then there's the matter of what Robin Hood is shooting at, and this is a homonym, and as you probably know, a homonym is two words that sound the same, but they're spelled differently and they have different meanings. And the homonym that appears in this story is heart. You all know H-E-A-R-T, heart, organ of the body, pumps the blood, keeps us alive. The other use of the word heart, which is H-A-R-T, no E, is a kind of deer. It's a mature red deer, a stag, the most prized thing to hunt. Unless, of course, you were in a medieval forest, which is governed by forest laws, the laws of vert and venison. Venison being a term for cooked deer. And there, the laws often stated that only a king could hunt and kill deer in a forest. And if you broke those laws, you could be punished physically. Changes over time, and certainly in fiction, in what version of the tale you read as to what the punishment is. You could have your hand chopped off, your finger chopped off, or your ears chopped back. It's more threatened in this story about the ears. for breaking that law. And the people who were charged with enforcing the laws of the forest, such as a provision against killing the king's deer, were the foresters, who are exactly the people that Robin Hood kills a deer in front of in this story. So, with that being said, I think I am ready to begin. And here is Pyle's little illustration of the story of Robin Hood goes to the shooting match. Prologue. Giving an account of Robin Hood and his adventures with the king's foresters, also telling how his band gathered about him, and of the merry adventure that gained him his good right-hand man, the famous Little John. I'll actually be saving the Little John such to the next video. In merry England, in the time of old, when good King Henry II ruled the land, there lived within the green glades of Sherwood Forest near Nottingham Town a famous outlaw whose name was Robin Hood. No archer ever lived who could speed a grey goose shaft with such skill and cunning as his, nor were there ever such yeomen as the 70 merry men who roamed with him through the greenwood shades. Right merrily they dwelt within the depths of Sherwood Forest, suffering neither care nor want, but passing the time in merry games of archery or bouts of cudgel play, living upon the king's venison, washed down with draughts of ale of October brewing. Not only Robin himself, but all the band were outlaws, and dwelt apart from other men. Yet they were beloved by the country people around about, for no one ever came to jolly Robin in time of need and went away again with an empty fist. And now I will tell how it came about that Robin Hood fell afoul of the law. When Robin was a youth of 18, stout of sinew and bold of heart, the sheriff of Nottingham proclaimed a shooting match and offered a prize of a butt of ale to whomsoever should shoot the best shaft in Nottinghamshire. Now, quoth Robin, I will go too, for fain I would draw a string for the bright eyes of my lass and a butt of good October brewing. So up he got, and took his good stout yew bow and a score more of broad cloth-yard arrows, and started off from Locksley town through Sherwood Forest to Nottingham. It was the dawn of day in the merry May time, when the hedgerows are green and flowers bedeck the meadows, daisies pied and yellow cuckoo buds and fair primroses all along the briery hedges, when apple buds blossom and sweet birds sing, the lark at dawn of day, the throstle cock and cuckoo, when lads and lasses look upon each other with sweet thoughts, when busy housewives spread their linen to bleach upon the bright green grass. Sweet was the greenwood as he walked along its paths, and bright the green and rustling leaves amid which the little birds sang with might and main. Blithely Robin whistled as he trudged along, thinking and made merry in her bright eyes, for in such times a youth's thoughts are wont to turn pleasantly upon the lass he loves best. And as thus he walked along with a brisk step and a merry whistle, he came suddenly upon some foresters, seated beneath a great oak tree. 15 there were in all, making themselves merry with feasting and drinking as they sat around a huge pasty, to which each man helped himself, thrusting his hands into the pie and washing down that which they ate with great horns of ale, which they drew all foaming from a barrel that stood nigh. Each man was clad in Lincoln green, and a fine show they made, seated upon the sward beneath that fair spreading tree. Then one of them, with his mouth full, called out to Robin, Hold up! Where goest thou, little lad, with thy 1 penny bow and thy farthing shafts? Robin grew angry, for no stripling likes to be taunted with the green of his ears. Now, quoth he, my bow and eke mine arrows are as good as thine, and moreover I go to the shooting match at Nottingham town, which same has been proclaimed by our good sheriff of Nottinghamshire. There I will shoot with other stout yeomen for a prize that has been offered of a fine butt of ale. Then one who held a horn of ale in his hand said, "Ho, ho, listen to the lad! Why, boy, thy mother's milk is yet scarce dry upon thy lips, and yet thou pratest of standing up with good stout men at Nottingham butts, thou who art scarce able to draw one string of a 2-stone bow." "I'll hold the best of you 20 marks," quoth bold Robin. "Thou hit the clout at 80 rods, by the help of Our Lady fair." At this they all laughed around, and one said, "Well boasted, thou fair infant, well boasted, and well thou knowest no target is nigh to make good thy wager." Another cried, "He'll be taking ale with his mother's milk next." At this Robin grew right mad. "Hark ye," he said, "yonder, at Glade's End, I see a herd of deer, even more than 80 rods distant. I'll hold you 20 marks that by leave of Our Lady I caused the best hart among them to die." "Now done," cried he who had spoken first, "and here are 20 marks. I wager thou causest no beast to die, with or without the aid of Our Lady." Robin took his good yew bow in his hand, and placing the tip at his instep, he strung it right deftly. He nocked a broad cloth-yard arrow, and raising the bow, drew the grey goose feather to his ear. Next moment the bowstring ran, and the arrow sped down the glade as a sparrowhawk skims in the northern wind. High leaped the noblest hart of all the herd, only to fall dead, reddening the green path with his heart's blood. "Ha!" cried bold Robin. "How likest that shot, good fellow? I wot the wager were mine, and it were 300 pounds. Then all the foresters were filled with rage, and he who had spoken first and had lost the wager was more angry than all. "Nay," cried he, "the wager is none of thine, and get thee gone straightway, or by all the saints in heaven I'll baste thy sides until thou wilt ne'er be able to walk again." "Knowest thou not," said another, "that thou hast killed the king's deer, and by the laws of our gracious lord and sovereign King Harry, thine ears should be shaven close to thy head?" "Catch him!" cried a third. "Nay," said a fourth, "let him even go because of his tender years." Never a word said Robin Hood, but he looked at the foresters with a grim face, then turning on his heel, strode away from them down the forest glade. But his heart was bitterly angry, for his blood was hot and youthful and prone to boil. Now well it would have been for him who had spoken first had he left Robin Hood alone, but his anger was hot, both because the youth had gone the better of him, and because of the deep draughts of ale he had been quaffing. So, all of a sudden, without any warning, he sprang to his feet, seized upon his bow, and fitted it to a shaft. "Aye," cried he, "and I'll hurry thee anon!" And he sent an arrow whistling after Robin. It was well for Robin Hood that the same forester's head was spinning with ale, or else he would have never taken another step. As it was, the arrow whistled within 3 inches of his head. Then he turned around and quickly drew his own bow and sent an arrow back in return. "You said I was no archer," he cried aloud. "Now say so again." The shaft flew straight, and the archer fell forward with a cry, and laid on his face upon the ground, his arrows rattling about him from out of his quiver. The grey goose shaft wet with his heart's blood. Then, before the others could gather their wits about them, Robin Hood was gone into the depths of the greenwood. Some started after him, but not with much heart, for each feared to suffer the death of his fellow. So presently they all came and lifted the dead man up and bore him away to Nottingham town. Meanwhile, Robin Hood ran through the greenwood. Gone was all the joy and brightness from everything, for his heart was sick within him, and it was borne in upon his soul that he had slain a man. "Alas," cried he, "thou hast found me an archer that will make thy wife to ring. I would that thou hadst ne'er said one word to me, or that I had never passed thy way, or even that my right forefinger had been stricken off ere that this had happened. In haste I smote, but grieve I sore at leisure. And then, even in his trouble, he remembered the old saw, that what's done is done, and the egg that cracked cannot be cured. And so he came to dwell in the greenwood that was to be his home for many years to come, never again to see the happy days with the lads and lasses of sweet Locksley town, for he was outlawed, not only because he had killed a man, but also because he had poached upon the king's deer, and £200 were set upon his head as a reward for whoever bring him to the court of the king. Now the sheriff of Nottingham swore that he himself would bring this knave Robin Hood to justice, and for two reasons. First, because he wanted the £200, and next, because the forester that Robin Hood had killed was of kin to him. But Robin Hood lay hidden in Sherwood Forest for 1 year, and in that time there gathered around him many others like himself, cast out from other folk for this cause or that. Some had shot deer in hungry winter time when they could get no other food, and had been seen in the act by foresters, but escaped, thus saving their ears. Some had been turned out of their inheritance, that their farms might be added to the king's land in Sherwood Forest. Some had been despoiled by a great baron, or a rich abbot, or a powerful esquire. All, for one cause or another, had come to Sherwood to escape wrong and oppression. So in all that year, 50 or more good stout yeomen gathered about Robin Hood, and chose him to be their leader and chief. Then they vowed, even as they themselves had been despoiled, they would despoil their oppressors, whether baron, abbot, knight, or squire, and that from each they would take that which had been wrung from the poor by unjust taxes, or land rents, or in wrongful fines, but to the poor folk they would give a helping hand in time of need or trouble, and this returned to them that which had been unjustly taken from them. Besides this, they swore never to harm a child, nor wrong a woman, be she maid, wife, or widow. And after a while, the people began to find no harm was meant to them, but that money or food came in time of want to many a poor family. They came to praise Robin and his merry men, and to tell many tales of him and his doings in Sherwood Forest, for they felt him to be one of themselves. And I'll leave it there for now and talk a bit about this. Just at the end there, Robin's oath not to harm women, that comes from the early ballads, pretty consistently in the ballads. And you do see the notions there of him robbing from the rich and giving to the poor, which is at least an expression that goes back to the Middle Ages. In Just a Ballad, it says that Robin Hood did poor men much good. How often you see him actually doing that in the ballads is a little less common, but certainly as an expression, it goes back a long ways. The story itself, the idea of Robin Hood encountering and killing foresters. I had mentioned last video how Pyle is working from a tradition that comes out of the prose lives. These prose retellings of ballads summarized and chopped together in Lives of Robin Hood. And one of the earliest of these is from about 1600. It's contained in a manuscript called the Sloane Manuscript, number 780, I believe now. And in it summarizes some adventures, and it starts with him encountering 14 or 15 foresters and killing them. And very shortly afterwards, in the 1600s and the 1700s, we find a ballad called Robin Hood's Progress to Nottingham, which tells that story in a little more detail. Some lines of that ballad are actually used here in Pyle. And it's often placed first in the ballad collections as sort of the origin story of how Robin became an outlaw. I mentioned earlier that a writer that was doing children's sort of Robin Hood stories before Pyle was Joseph Cuddill, or writing under the name of Stephen Percy, who wrote his Robin Hood book around 1850, and he also begins with this story. But what Pyle is, and oh, I should say one other thing that comes from 1600 and that prose life that this tradition started in is Locksley, and that is uh, said to be in fiction usually in Nottinghamshire. In real world, it's probably Locksley in Yorkshire, which is sort of part of modern day Sheffield in Yorkshire, and you often hear now of Robin of Locksley as Robin's real name. So that actually kind of tied in with his story. Now the most of the earlier versions of this in Percy and the ballads, the prose life of Robin Hood from around 1600, and then Robin kills all the foresters, or he kills all but one of them anyway, or grievously wounds them. And Pyle has scaled that back to where he just kills one. And also Pyle adds details. Before they refused to pay the wager, you know, the foresters did pay Robin his money. They said pretty much, if you don't get out of here, we'll beat you up. But this one adds one of them shooting an arrow and trying to kill Robin Hood. And also there's the threat that Robin broke the forest laws, and therefore his life is already in danger. And so Robin's killing more of a self-defense here than he did in the original. And also what Pyle really adds is a sense of regret and remorse that Robin Hood is killed. He is sick in heart that he has killed someone. He regrets it, even though he decides what's done is done. But he does regret it greatly, and he doesn't kill again till much later in the book, towards the end, when he kills Guy of Gisborne in a fight. So maybe this is because Howard Pyle, when he's adapting this, is a Quaker. He abhors violence to an extent, and so his Robin Hood is a lot more conscientious than many of them are towards killing. What else can I say about this this tale? So that's really one of Pyle's great contributions. There is adding that moral dimension to it, adding it, and you see it softened even more. I mean, there are comic book, classic illustrated versions where Robin doesn't kill anyone; he just shoots at the foresters. Also, what's odd is that in the ballad version, it doesn't really come up that it's illegal to kill a king's deer. It comes up in Pyle's version. It comes up in other ones. It's not really present in the original, and it might be because some of the original ballads weren't actually set in a proper forest where the forest laws were in place. They weren't in Sherwood Forest. Some of them were in Barnesdale in Yorkshire, which the forest laws did apply to. Possibly, I don't know. But the idea of Robin Hood countering foresters, that comes up in other stories, especially around the 1800s. You start to see, I think, the story of Robin Hood rescuing someone from who was poaching from foresters, so Robin not poaching himself. He, for example, saves Much the Miller's Son in the 1938 film with Errol Flynn, and again at the beginning of the Robin Sherwood TV series in the 1980s. He saves Little John's son in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner. And Alan Adale in the 2006 Robin Hood TV show starts again with Alan poaching and Robin rescuing him. So it's a very common motif, whether it's Robin Hood himself doing the poaching or others he's saving from poaching. It's not the first origin story we have from Robin Hood. The earliest ballads don't say how Robin Hood became an outlaw, but by around the mid-1500s, there are actually references that Robin Hood was outlawed because of debts, because he owed money. Maybe if you're a university student listening to this, you can identify with a Robin Hood who was outlawed for debts. Besides that version and this one, you get later versions, I think more starting, especially the 20th century, of Robin Hood coming back from the Crusades and finding his lands taken from him. That's not in this book. That's kind of a later tradition. So with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll come back next time when I read Howard Pyle's section about how Robin Hood first met Little John. So again, Alan W. Wright from the Robin Hood website, www.boldoutlaw.com. Stay safe, stay healthy. If you're watching this close to when I made it, stay indoors and flatten the curve. Thanks very much.